Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the OK Grognard Show. It is Saturday, August 15th, 2020. 9:30 a.m.? No, it's not. It's like 10:45. Why so late? Well, I had some audio problems. Something wrong with the system, and then when I went to reboot it, naturally it wanted to do an update on the operating system, so it got caught up in that for a while, and then even after it was rebooted, I still had problems, so I had to dig around and figure a few things out. I think we're working now. I think we're operating correctly. It's GM Review Day. What did we decide to do? Well, we decided to have a little look-see at the old Divine Right classic TSR wargame, hex and chit, wargame extraordinaire. One of my favorites of all time, for sure. There's a few games that I really love. This is one of them. The original Civilization is one that I really will play every year. Kingmaker, Avalon Hills Kingmaker. That's a third one that I will play any chance I can get. Beautiful map, which you can see I have an image up, which I snagged off of Board Game Geek. It's absolutely wonderful. The marginalia was worked on by Tom Wam, buddy of mine who lives in town, who I am very lucky to get to play with regularly. I got a copy of this just as a backup. Because this game is getting hard to find. No doubt about it. Love the little tray. Classic, all the chits, dice, little diplomacy cards. We've got all the faction cards, personality cards for the different rulers. That's a little fun thing you get to do in this game. So why are we reviewing this? 1979. Isn't that something? Isn't that something? Well, I'll tell you, because it's a fantasy war game. Two brothers, last name Ramen, brought this to TSR and said, hey, you guys do cool stuff. If I'm not mistaken, this was their Glenn and Kenneth Ramen. This was their game setting for their D&D games and other fantasy games. Design Glenn and Kenneth Ramen. Editing Timothy Jones, Tom Wam, and Mike Carr. Interior map design Aurora D.C. Sutherland III and D.A. Trampier. Logotype design Tramp. Development playtesting Mike Carr, Tom Christensen, Dave Danner, Mark Eggert, Ernie Gygax, Bill Hoyer, Ted Jones, Tim Jones, Todd Jones, Tyler Jones, Timothy Kask, and a handful of others. Of course, Sutherland, Tramp, and Tom Wam. Joe Orlowski's in there. How about that? Yeah. Well, I'll tell you. If you ever wanted to grab something that TSR published that wasn't used as a D&D setting officially, but was all built up and ready to go as if it was a D&D setting, you could use this. The early history of Menaria, which is the name of the continent, world. On pre-cataclysmic Menaria, Minaria, little is known. Of pre-cataclysmic Menaria, little is known. Outside the information provided in the few surviving histories compiled in late Loroi times. Not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. They were a highly civilized race, more akin to the present-day woodland elves than men or dwarves. Out of the earlier kingdoms in the barbarian lands, they forged a great empire. Yet their drive to empire was inspired more out of pride in their culture than any ambition for trade or military glory. The 2,000-year period following the conquest of Menaria is remembered as the classical period of their culture. It was a time of great artistic and scientific development, a time of peace and tranquility marred only by the long rebellion of the Scarlet Witch King and occasional internecine strife. Then came the cataclysm. Its causes remain unknown, although some blame it on the results of the extensive magical research conducted by them. At any rate, the world literally turned upside down. Tempests, earthquakes, tidal waves, volcanic eruptions, and giant meteorite storms shattered the land and virtually wiped out the empire. When it was over, barbarism overwhelmed the survivors, and tribal warfare raged among the ruins. Ironically, they were unable to adapt to the changed conditions. What remained of the empire gradually dwindled into insignificance in the West as short-lived barbarian kingdoms rose and fell in a seemingly endless succession. Fortunately, not all of their culture was lost during the centuries of this dark age. The forest elves and the sorcerers' covens grimly fought to preserve what they could of the glory and wisdom of the past. In the last 100 years, new and powerful kingdoms have advanced over the woods and lakes where only barbarians had dwelled, bringing a new order to Menaria. Today, 11 kingdoms and 2 sorceress principalities make up the political entities of the West. Most of them are feudal monarchies, generally lacking the political and economic base for territorial expansion. However, border strife and raids for plunder are common, and the struggle for power continues. So true. So true. So then the question becomes, the kingdoms of Menaria. Do you want to use these straight out of the book? They each have their own little write-up. Black Hand, the Dwarves, the Eaters of Wisdom, Elfland. You may want to rename some of these things. Hothier, Immer, Mivir, Mutar, Pan, Ramboon, Shukasm, the Trolls, and Zorn, the Goblin Kingdom, to the north. So yeah. What do we got? Way up north there. Lovely. Elfland upper left, Immer upper center. The dwarves, if you look way up to the left, and you also look to the far right, those green splotches, those are where the dwarves hang out. They are spread out. Trolls pop in a number of spots, including middle left in that green swampy area, as well as far right, kind of lower end, about a third of the way up the right end of the board. You've got this desert kingdom. Oh, trolls also center lower green. So there's a couple of shades of green for the trolls and for the dwarves. The trolls green being a little darker. The desert kingdom of Shekazim is kind of spread out, but they do have a pathway to a port. Ramboon, primarily a seafaring, as is Mivier and Hothier. Both Hothier has ports, but they're not as reliant on the sea as Ramboon or Mivier, both of which are kind of penned in along that western coastline there. Muttart, practically landlocked. They have no navy, neither does Immer or Pan. Those three kingdoms, the red, the yellow, and the blue, are all very strong anyway. So there's a certain balance in this game that's pretty good. The whole idea of the game is for you to randomly start off with one of these kingdoms under your control. And part of what you can do over the course of your turn is to use diplomacy with any of the other neutral kingdoms. And if you can bring it to your side, make an alliance with them through diplomacy, you can then take their nation faction card and pull a random personality from a deck of 20 personalities for their current leader. As long as that leader is alive, it is whatever it is. Sometimes it's a petty king, sometimes it's a very helpful king in various ways, whether it's militaristic or some other way. You draw a diplomacy card every turn, which can pile up, which is fine. And you can use them or not use them when you go to use diplomacy on someone, when you attempt to negotiate for alliances with someone. During that diplomacy phase, you can also utilize a different action, which is to go and be diplomatic with a kingdom that is already allied with someone else, and you can attempt to talk them into dissolving that alliance, which can be useful if you're under the gun, being put upon by a kingdom with a number of allies, because there is no limit. You could have one kingdom who controls all of the alliance, all of the neutral nations, and is just working to take over the entire board. Now, there are a number of turns. What you can't see on that map, on the image map there, that is up on the board, is that there is a game turn track at the bottom of the map. And there are 20 turns ostensibly in this game. You can play longer or shorter if you want. Often we will play, when I get a chance to play it, for a certain amount of time, because it can be a long game. And we'll say play for 3.5 hours, maybe 4, maybe a little longer. But we'll choose an end time. We'll generally choose an end time when we're definitely going to be done. And then we will choose that at a half hour before that time, we will confirm that that time is still there. Because if someone's running away with the game 2.5 hours in, and we're going to play for 3 hours, and we get to that half hour before the end of the game, and somebody is just so overwhelmingly big on points, whether they've leveled a certain number of castles or taken a certain number of other lands and achieved victory points in any number of ways, then it's, conquest and destruction still is the way to get major victory points. It is a war game. It is meant to be played as both an area control and as a militaristic war game. So if somebody's so far ahead by that point, sometimes we'll just take an informal vote and say, hey, you know what? Even another half hour, even if we squeeze in another couple of turns apiece, it's not going to really change anything, so we'll call it. But quite often there becomes this, if there's been some turtling earlier, people staying isolationist for any stretches of the game, often when we get to that half hour before the end of the game, we'll have a flurry of activity with, oh yes, you can send your diplomat out and attempt assassinations. Of course, if you fail, you then are without a diplomat for a certain period of time. There are penalties for various losses or failures, which can result in, let's say you try to bribe the leader of a country you're trying to diplomatically talk into being your ally, and they don't fall for it. Well, you may not be able to send a diplomat back there for 1 to 6 plus 2 plus 3 turns, whatever, some sort of a period of time where that country is off limits to you diplomatically. And so too, if you would attempt an assassination, you may lose your diplomat altogether. And it'll be for a certain number of turns, and it's usually random with some sort of a modifier based on what it was you did. And then at that point, supposedly the son of the previous ambassador has been trained up and becomes your new diplomat. So that's a neat little aspect of the game. Well, there's a number of aspects to the game that while you play, you will discover will transfer well to running a campaign within this setting or within any setting. So by way of GM review here, let me just state that just playing a war game like this with medieval fantasy aspects to it creates a lot of fodder for creating your own setting, running your own campaigns, whether you utilize material from this or not. But like I say, the map alone, if you wanted to completely rewrite how it's used, wipe out the history that is in the book for that game, but still use the map, you can certainly do that. And it's rich. It's a beautiful fantasy map in and of itself. It's got plenty going on with 11 different nations and a couple of principalities that can all come into play. There's a balance to it, obviously already set up for the war game itself. Now that comes into play in the number of troops, whether they're ground troops or naval troops, that are available to each country in relation to its place on the map, how many other places it is adjacent to or nearby, how large an area needs to be defended. So part of the balance that is there in this setting as written for the game is in the number of troops that are available to each given nation when it begins. You can lose troops to disease. You can lose troops to combat, to failures on the battlefield. They go into a pool for that nation, and there are times when you can randomly pick up reinforcements. So they're always available if they've been destroyed for one reason or another to become reinforcements down the line. But there is a hard cap. Every nation has a hard cap. That's annoying. Excuse me a moment. Well, sorry about that. Some sort of emergency alerts are going on. I don't believe they are weather alerts, although we are going to get some weather coming in here. Doesn't look like it's anything particularly dangerous, like the tornado we had earlier in the week. Oh, and by the way, there are cataclysmic disasters that can happen within the game. And some of them happen for random reasons, and some of them will happen because one of the two sorceress principalities casts some great spell that causes problems for one nation or another. Whether it's a firestorm or an eruption or an earthquake, meteorite storm. Also, there are special heroes. And there's another thing that you can kind of glom out of this game, is that there's a whole variety of heroes that can step up and help lead parts of your armies. Also, there are, and these things are in the expanded rules, but they're all in there, and very few people I know that play these games don't just use all of the rules. You might play one game with just the basic rules out of the box to first get used to it, but once you've played it once, you want to throw all this stuff in there. It's kitchen table sort of thing. Kitchen sink, rather. And all of these heroes, and also there's a great many magical artifacts which can be picked up and utilized by your heroes or by your leaders to aid your armies in overrunning or conquering various territories. And the game itself, play 2 to 6 players. Obviously, in a game where there's diplomacy and alliances potentially between the players, which there always is in Divine Right, you probably want to play with at least 3 players. Anytime there are deals to be made and whatnot, you always want to have the opportunity, once somebody is overwhelming everybody else, to set up an alliance amongst those that are being oppressed or crushed under the heel of the whoever it is that is winning the game. So you always want to have some kind of a fallback, a way of getting back in the game. There are no mechanisms by which once you've made any alliances, you have to keep them. So everything is by trust. And if somebody gets destroyed, they're not necessarily out of the game. There are rules by which somebody can evolve into a new nation, maintaining whatever points their original nation was able to get, and then just carrying them over into their starting from scratch position, which is usually not a good position to be in, but doesn't count you out entirely, and you can always make some quick alliances to get yourself back into the game in one way or another. But you can be knocked out of the game, and you don't have to play with the rules that allow somebody to respawn, for lack of a better term, as a new nation after they've been destroyed. So you can certainly play a game where once somebody has been knocked out, they're out of the game. And if you play it that way and you're not, and everybody's playing quickly, then usually it's not too boring to watch whoever's left playing finish up the game and cheer on somebody who maybe was an ally at one time, or a lot of ways to go. In any event, as I say, for a GM review, this is definitely a game where if you ever see a deal on it somewhere, pick up a copy. It's an interesting read, even if you're not really a wargamer, but you are a D&D player or a medieval fantasy RPGer of one stripe or another. It's certainly unofficially it is officially a TSR product. So if you ever wanted to say I'm running a game in a TSR setting, this is a TSR setting. It's not a D&D setting, unless you make it one, or unless you play with who's ever left from those old campaigns that whence this came originally, right? Anywho, I want to thank you, anybody who's following in the channel. Sorry we got a late start today. Don't forget, if you are following on Twitch, make sure you chime in to the stream chat while you're here, because it gets you in for the weekly drawing. We don't require any purchasing or anything to be put on that. We only ask that once you're following, you chime in on the stream chat so we know you're not a bot. Otherwise, we don't want to have a list full of bots to draw from for the giveaway that we do, which is just some random thing. Lately, we've been doing badges for Virtual Gamehole Con, which is coming up November 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th. That's going to be fun. Hopefully you'll be able to go there. I want to also make everyone aware of the upcoming schedule. We did GM reviews today. Rules Retrospective tomorrow. We'll be continuing with the first edition Cleric. We kind of did a little background on it, looking at OD&D, its origin story, if you will. But we'll be looking at the first edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Cleric class in and of itself this time, and then probably the following week we'll be looking at subclasses, in particular the Druid, since we're working on the Cleric right now. We did the Fighter already, Paladins, Rangers, all that stuff. Monday, weekly news and announcements. Be sure to check in on Mondays to see what's what. We'll do cartography and world building on Tuesday. Wednesday is campaign discussion. We do GMing tips on Thursday, and we build adventures on Friday, and then back around to another GM perspective review on Saturday. Once again, if you're following the channel, if you're viewing us on Twitch, be sure to be a follower. It's a good thing. If you're catching up with this on YouTube, where we upload every episode, then thank you very much. Subscribe over there. Give us a thumbs up on a video you're catching up with. And feel free to make a comment. Give us some constructive criticism. We can always appreciate a helping hand from a viewer to making the show a little better. So, everybody, stay safe in these troubling times. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Please do join us again, 9:30 a.m. every day Sorry for the delay today. I know we were over an hour late. System problems, couldn't be helped. We'll get it all squared away. I think we have it done now. Take care. Bye-bye.